Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the 84th episode of the Oligarchy Disruptor podcast with your host, Bennett Leon. And of course, we have Ashley Downing with us as well.
Hey, everybody.
Alrighty, guys, we have another amazing episode for you today. What are we going to be talking about today, Ash?
Statehood. And yeah, so what it kind of means to not have statehood, basically.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and jump into the first resource that we have for you, which is an article from The Hill out earlier today about this House vote. And as you can see, this is being widely talked about throughout the social media spheres. And as we see here, the House approved the vote for statehood for Washington, D.C. with 232 votes for and 180 against. Now, this is a historic move, marking the first time that either chamber has passed legislation to elevate the district to the 51st state and empower its residents with long-sought voting representation within the halls of Congress. What's really interesting about this is that a lot of people do support and have supported for some time the movements for or the cases for Washington, D.C. to become a state and for Puerto Rico. And there's actually more for Puerto Rico, which is interesting because this is the one that's moving first, like Washington, D.C. Before Puerto Rico. But I mean, we'll take it as it comes, I guess, even though we don't know if it's going to go anywhere, but we'll talk about that a little later on. Now, when it comes to the argument against this, I wanted to highlight this quote from one of the representatives from Georgia. Her name is Jody Heiss. She said, opposing to this, quote, "My friends on the other side of the aisle may gasp in protest and outrage at the suggestion that what this is all about is an attempt to get 2 more Democratic senators. But that's what this is all really about. The Constitution clearly establishes a federation of sovereign states, and the representation here in Washington, D.C. comes from those states, the federation of those states. This city, this district is a unique entity." So, as you can see there, Representative Heiss has taken the tone like the most of the GOP has taken, and blasting the legislation as a Democratic power grab, noting that the lopsided partisan leanings of the district's residents and their critics contend that DC statehood is unconstitutional, arguing that the founders established the city as a neutral zone to govern outside the influence of state politics, which is true. But at the same time, those people living there are, we're going to make this case a little after this, right? But actually, maybe it might be a good time to bring it up now. So what is the case for these states?
I think that they even mention it a little bit in this article too, but a lot of the, like DC, for instance, they do pay taxes. Puerto Rico doesn't pay taxes, but federal taxes, but they still have payroll taxes and other types of taxes that they do pay into. So it's kind of like that phrase from, taxation without representation. So that's kind of the argument for it. And when you think about it, right at the top here, it says 4.4 million American citizens do not have voting representation in Congress. That's really what makes us a democratic state, right? Is the fact that we have the ability to vote, at least on the people who are going to be making our laws. We at least get to vote them into those positions. So that's really the biggest argument, I think, for statehood.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you mentioned very first and foremost that one very popular phrase that everyone knows, no taxation without representation. And it's something that Americans should very much, it should resonate with a lot of Americans because of its significance to us historically with our oppressors, aka the monarchs that reigned over the UK and also over the American colonies that led to our American Revolution because of our lack of representation in their parliament, and they get to do and tax us how much ever they wanted and do all that kind of stuff. So, which of course is really unfair, which is why we started a revolution and fought them and beat them and started our own country, So for us to deny a piece of land that is our own territory that we also owe, we have a duty to.
Responsibility for.
Absolutely. And we're not fulfilling that. So I think that's very interesting to note as well.
Yeah. And I think that this second paragraph is really important to mention too, that, first, I guess I should mention that up there it says Puerto Rico, DC, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, all. But what's really interesting about this is a lot of those areas are large and they have big populations. And people, one of the biggest arguments are, they don't have, they're too small of states. But it says here, DC has more residents than Vermont or Wyoming. That's a very big population that's not being represented then. And then you also see here, Puerto Rico, if they were able to become a state, they would be the 29th most populous state. I mean, that's a lot.
That is crazy. And they would also they would contribute significantly to the federal economy. But no, I also kind of wanted to talk about these charts that are in this article here from the dataforprogress.org website that we're on. So this chart shows support for statehood is stronger for Puerto Rico than it is for DC, which I mentioned earlier, which I thought was interesting why DC came out first before Puerto Rico, even given all the problems they had with Hurricane Maria and all those other hurricanes that preceded after that. They were not given that. And they, even though we do have a responsibility, like you mentioned a little earlier to them. So the support for is that lighter shade for Puerto Rico, and the support, of course, the Washington for DC is that darker shade, and we see way more for Puerto Rico than we do for DC. For the opposition, they're pretty much the same. A little bit more for opposed to Washington DC. I'm assuming that's be more on the basis of the constitutionality of it, taking that kind of route for that, and don't know, which is, I assume most people, they DC wins there as well, so they don't know what to take about that or think about that. Let's go ahead.
I think that the reason for that is because the main argument for DC not being able to become a state is that neutral zone, right? That the Constitution has. So I can honestly see this. I can see why Puerto Rico would be higher than Washington, D.C.
It does make sense. And it's something that to be considered, at least, and not just a power grab. So let's take a look at this one as well. So this one takes a look at the partisanship strongly influences the statehood support. So for this one, we have two different voters voted in Democratic in 2018 and voted Republican in 2018. So it looks like Democrats support the statehood for Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico way more than Republicans. It's actually negative for for both Puerto Rico and D.C., but it's way more for way worse for D.C. for the Republicans. So yeah, interesting. Democrats support that way more. Age is also a strong factor in support for statehood. So we have different generations here that we're looking at in comparison: the millennials, Generation X, boomers, and silent generation. Don't know what that one is.
Boomers.
Yeah, literally. Never heard of that one.
Those are definitely the boomers. Those are definitely the people who are following the Constitution, that phrase about having that neutral zone from where the federal government lies. Clearly, because a lot of them still support Puerto Rico becoming a state. I mean, that's what it would say to me. And I think that, I mean, let's be honest, boomers are the ones that are more, is conservative thinking. The right word, maybe?
Backwards thinking, sure. Destructive, sure.
I would say conservative.
Yeah. So I think you made a good point there. Yeah. A good observation. I think you're right about that as well. But of course, for the younger generations, like we see Generation X, millennials, it still rings true that we support this. We support the case for statehood way more, and much more for Puerto Rico than for DC.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to note about this article is just the fact of what they're really fighting for, which is to be able to be represented. You know, we live in a country that people claim to be the best democracy, you know, and it's funny that people say that because if you actually look at our democratic score, it's not as high as some countries. But even with that being like our big slogan, you know, land of the free, we have millions of Americans who are paying into a system that they have absolutely no choice in the matter. They have no representation to be able to say, hey, we want this, or hey, we need this. And I think when you're in a country like Puerto Rico, or in a state like Puerto Rico, you're so far, right? DC does not know the needs of Puerto Rico. They do not. And we need somebody from Puerto Rico to be able to vouch for those people. Same with American Samoa, with the Marina Islands. It's just very interesting to me that we claim responsibility over these areas, and yet we are so out of touch with them, and still don't want to get to know what their needs are, obviously.
It's really interesting that you bring that up as well, because like I think that's really important to note as well, because like for all these territories, like, you know, you want to take, for example, like Hawaii or whatnot, like what happened with Hawaii, like it was like a farm, it was like a farming island or whatever. It had its own like king, like it was its own kingdom, right? And there were some farmers there. Dole, I don't know if I forget that name, the first name, but Dole, like that orange juice, like that juice name or whatever. That guy was working in Hawaii. He actually helped lobby Congress in the United States to go take over Hawaii and make it a state after that. You know, so I think it's very interesting to kind of note that as well, that like that was the most recent time, right? I'm pretty sure, unless there was a more recent one than that, but I don't think. But yeah, so when it comes to that, like we invaded their territory, but we took responsibility there to actually take care of them after, give them every entitlement that comes along with them being an American citizen. But that's something that we didn't do for, like you mentioned, the Mariana Islands, the Philippines, the list goes on and on and on. But what did we do there? We invaded there also. We also claimed territory there. I mean, they are American territories, you know, like, but what's interesting is that we don't assume responsibility there, even though we invaded and conquered them and told them that they're ours, basically. But and we won't give them anything else that comes along with the benefits of being being an American, really. And they're not fully American. You know? Like that's the point. They're not fully American, so they get that.
Well, and I think that what you said is it reminds me of Hurricane Maria, when Puerto Rico was so badly hit. And I think that it was $41 billion was allocated in relief funds, and Puerto Rico only received $11.2 billion of that money. And I remember seeing videos of nursing homes and people literally floating in their wheelchairs, people who are just walking around, you know, knee deep in water and not having electricity for months, literally for months. And yet we were plumbing all this money to Texas and Louisiana. And, you know, sure, they really needed the money as well. But Puerto Rico is part of the United States. They deserve that same, you know, amount of funds. And I remember that Trump had, and oh yeah, you brought it up. Trump tweeted that Puerto Rico got $91 billion in funds, when in all honesty, $91 billion wasn't even spent in relief funds, and they only got $11.2 billion of that. So that's just a perfect reason why they need representation, because they're clearly getting the shorthand of the stick.
Absolutely. And I want to take the time to kind of go over these tweets that we have here from the president from earlier last year in April. He was talking about like how Puerto Rico, and I quote, Puerto Rico got $91 billion for the hurricane, more money that has ever been gotten for a hurricane before, and all their local politicians do is complain and ask for more money. The politicians is what he means. The politicians are grossly incompetent, spending the money foolishly or corruptly, and only take from the USA. Wow. Only take, they say.
Foolishly and corruptly, too. It's like he has absolutely zero trust in Puerto Rico.
The best thing that ever happened to Puerto Rico is President Donald J. Trump. So keep in mind, this is still the president talking. So many wonderful people, but with such bad island leadership and with so much money wasted, cannot continue to hurt our farmers and states with these massive payments and so little appreciation. So he wants them to be groveling at his feet, begging and thanking him, kissing his boot and kissing his ring, to thank him for the money that they're getting, like as if he's directly getting it to them, which is not the case, and it's their responsibility. It's their fucking responsibility.
Exactly. Well, and it's really funny to me that he makes these numbers, $91 billion, when they spent like half that, not even, but this is just really why we need representation in these areas, because it does also show how out of touch he is, how they spend the money foolishly and corruptly. Honestly, to me, that seems like a racist statement. And then that they have so little appreciation. Don't quote me when I say this, guys, but I'm pretty sure that there was not an area in Louisiana or Texas or those southern states that did not have electricity for a month. I don't think that there was a place that did not have electricity for a month. And Puerto Rico did not have electricity in some areas for months, plural. So little appreciation. I mean, I would also be, if I was a politician for Puerto Rico, I'd be asking for more money too.
As when we were talking about that, and to see how he behaved in Puerto Rico and how much he talked about their government and like the mayor of San Juan, which was Julian Cruz, and the governor and all that stuff. So like the dude is just, if it's not Republicans that he's talking to, he doesn't want to talk to them, in other words, and he doesn't want to work with them. So that's the kind of president we have, and that's the situation we find ourselves in, and that's why fucking Joe Biden has a 10-point lead on him nationally. And as shitty as Joe Biden is, he looks like he actually might be Trump. So if you would have asked me a month ago, I would have said it would definitely be Trump, but who knows now? So
I still don't know. It's way too early. Way too early.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, so let's wrap up here. Unless you want to mention anything else about who we have to talk about.
No, I know we didn't talk about like what is to come with this House vote. The House voted, but Trump has already mentioned that he's going to veto it if it does somehow miraculously pass in the Republican Senate. So, I mean, it's really awesome that this is being talked about more, but I don't really see it going anywhere right now, unfortunately. But I think it's good that we did an episode on it because it's important to make this known. I don't think a lot of people realize that 4.4 million Americans don't have representation in Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned a little earlier how like the representative and the GOP basically are like totally against it, but yes, Trump is also staunchly against it and has promised to veto. And That just shows how completely irresponsible it is and how much of a political move it really is for them. And they explained, especially that one representative that we talked about earlier in that quote. She mentioned how it was because of the
Democrats
wanting to win.
Yeah.
My bad. It was top of my tongue. Yeah. The Democrats wanting to win and take over Congress using that method. So it really is literally a political decision for the Republicans to
block
or to think that way. So yeah, let's leave it at that. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you haven't done so already, definitely write us a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, and comment down below if you are watching on YouTube, on Facebook, or wherever you're watching us as well. We would love to hear back from you. And follow us on our social media pages and website where you can also get. So where can they follow us, Ashley?
Every single social media platform, basically. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, as you mentioned, our videos are there. And then we write articles, and you can listen to our podcast as well on our website, WordPress. It's on WordPress. So I think you can just look up WordPress, the Oligarchy Disruptor. And then every single podcast platform, basically, there's 8 of them that we are on. Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, to name a few.
Absolutely. So with that, once again, guys, thank you so much for watching and tuning in. We will see you on the next episode. Thanks, guys.
Bye.